All right, how is everyone doing today? Welcome to my channel. We're going to get right into another Bible decode coming from the book of Luke and also The War of the Jews by Josephus. And this is all coming out of a book from Michael Menescott, M-E-N-A-S-G-O-T-Z. It came out, I think, late 2024. Called Christianity's Origins as a Flavian Secrecy Cult. And Menescott is one of many authors out there who are forwarding the Roman origins hypothesis of the New Testament, and that the Romans wrote the entire New Testament, and it is a fraud, and it is a psychological operation. It's part of wartime propaganda against the Jews. In particular, the Romans that wrote this were the Flavian dynasty of Caesars, that being Vespasian and his two sons, Titus and Domitian, from 69 to 96 AD. And the story goes that they wrote the book of the Gospels, certainly the Synoptic Gospels, and they backdated the story by 40 years or 40 plus years. And then they also wrote Jewish War, or War of the Jews, by Josephus. Josephus is a pen name of kind of the all-encompassing imperial court of the Flavian dynasty. Don't know the exact people, although some people claim that it is a guy named Arius Piso and other members of his family, and he was a close relative of the Flavian Caesars, kind of like the shadow emperor to both Titus and Vespasian. But the Roman origins hypothesis, they made up this guy Josephus, who, even according to his autobiography, lived in the court of the Caesars in a townhouse, and he was one of the court historians, and he was an adopted member of the family. He's known as Flavius Josephus. Christians generally know Josephus as really the only guy in the first century, other than the writers of the New Testament, who corroborates the existence of Jesus. And of course, this rings quite hollow when you recognize the Flavian hypothesis, along with the fact that he was a Flavian. So his word doesn't really carry very much weight. He also is deemed by Western historians as being one of the great historians ever, and one of certainly the great historians of antiquity, but that really falls hollow as well as you really read what's actually in this work. But there are many parallels and riddles and jokes. Sorry, I just pressed the wrong button here, and I'm off my rocker here. Okay, trying to get back to the right screen. Okay. Yeah, so yeah, there were many different people that were involved in it, but many different themes and many different parallels involving both Jewish War and Luke. And it's written as companion writings. One parodies the other, and the other parodies it back. It's a mutual kind of a mirroring, or almost a conversation between the two. And there are many themes of parallels, but mostly it's mockery and mean-spirited ridicule, a lot of violence, a lot of pornography, once you kind of pick up on what the code is. And in particular, there's a lot of different themes. So one of the main themes is that what Jesus predicts is going to happen or prophecies what's going to happen, these things are fulfilled by Titus. Titus is one of the generals in this Jewish war from 66 to 73 AD. He replaced his father Vespasian. When Vespasian became emperor, he appointed Titus to be the new general in this war. And both of them were actually, injured fairly, significantly in this war. And that is kind of what brought on the New Testament. The Romans were very sick of fighting against the Jews. The Jews had been insurrecting, revoluting, and uprising and warring against the Romans for over 100 years, on and off, mostly on. And it culminated in this war in 66 AD. And for a long time, the Romans were very concerned about the amount of resources they had to dedicate to the Jews in Judea, because they were always kind of high maintenance. They had this separatist, monotheistic God. They believed they were the chosen people. They believed in all these strange animal sacrifice rituals, with the Passover and kosher food laws and circumcision and strictures against graven images, especially images of Caesar. And so they just felt like this is not worth dealing with these people. And they also knew that the Jews were preparing for a Messiah. A Messiah was prophesied in the Old Testament in many, many different places. And the general, atmosphere in the first century was that a Messiah was coming, or possibly that the Messiah is here. And there were really three candidates in this war: Simon, Eleazar, and John. These are the leaders of the Jewish rebels in this war. And so the Romans, being the great progenitors of propaganda that they were, decided to present a Jewish Messiah who was a Prince of Peace and who believed in rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and who believed in turning the other cheek to oppression, and who believed that the Roman slave owner had the greatest faith in all of Judea, and who believed that that the Jews should forgive the Romans, for they know not what they do, and who believed in walking an extra mile with the Roman soldiers' pack on my back, and who, when deciding to be uprise and to revolted against the Jews, overturning the tables outside the temple of the money changers, who were getting rid of the coins that had Caesar's inscription on them and changing them up for Jewish coins that didn't, so that they could maintain their rituals inside of the temple, and messing with the peddlers who were selling doves and pigeons and lambs and rams outside of the temple, so that they could keep their rituals going. So Jesus was intentionally disrupting the rituals of the Jews, while at the same time, elevating the Romans. And that's the general nature of the Gospels. And it even gets worse once you get into the Paul material, where Paul actually justifies slavery, where he says that, slaves need to obey their masters. And so the Romans also, in addition to having this motive, they had the MO. This was their general method. They used this method of creating a fake religion in a number of different times in the first century. I'm not saying that the whole story is complete fiction. It may be based on, possibly on the Dead Sea Scrolls, or some other story of some Jewish people who maybe were very pious and did some uprising. Or, but I certainly believe that this Jesus character, along with the Essenes in general, along with Josephus in general, are all fiction, which takes a sledgehammer to a lot of Western civilization. I think all of the Western religions are in jeopardy because of not only this, but also there's a lot of damage that's done to the Old Testament as well. The book of Esther, the book of Job, Isaiah after chapter 54, and possibly the entire thing. But the entire thing, the Old Testament, is in jeopardy because it's plagiarized from much older writings from the Sumerians and somewhat the Egyptians. And so all the stories that are in the New Testament, like in Genesis, in the first half before Abraham comes in, those are all much older stories that are in other works that are much older. So I don't know why you would want to, give these some kind of authenticity when you could be reading more original documents. But those are in Sumerian or in Egyptian, or in many, many other of the Near Eastern groups of people, like between the Sumerians and the Israelis, or the Jews. Okay, now this set of parallels that Menescats does, what he does is he digs into the book of Luke and finds the parallels between Luke and a War of the Jews. And like I said, there were many themes of, Titus becoming the second coming of Jesus by fulfilling all of his prophecies. All the prophecies that Jesus makes are fulfilled by Titus in the same place, set off by exactly 40 years. The 3-year ministry of Jesus is matched by the 3-year military campaign of Titus. Wherever Jesus goes, Titus goes. And the same events happen to them conceptually, not literally. But there are also many parallels between Jesus and the life of Josephus, which he talks about in his autobiography and also in the history of this Jewish war, because Josephus claims that he was one of the military generals for the Jews until he surrendered to Vespasian and then had an epiphany that that God now favors the Romans and not the Jews, and so he began to defect to the Romans. He gave Vespasian the star prophecy saying that one day you will become emperor. When Vespasian finally did become emperor, he pardoned Josephus, took him to Rome with him, made him one of the court historians, and adopted him into his family. That is what the story says in Josephus's autobiography. So we're going to look at some more parallels between Jesus and Josephus. Okay, and just like Jesus in Luke, Jewish war describes how Josephus has leaders seeking to lay their hands on him, but then holding their peace, him being affirmed at teaching the true way of God, craftiness in the conversation being perceived and being tempted, speaking truth, and a conclusion being reached regarding whether something should be given to Caesar or to God. Okay, so we're going to look at this parallel. I forgot to mention also that when Menescats digs into the book of Luke, he finds 250 parallels between Luke and War of the Jews, and which is an astounding number, obviously, over 10 per chapter of Luke. And he puts them on a graph, all of the points, with the book of Luke on the vertical axis and War of the Jews on the horizontal axis. Wherever he finds a parallel, he places a dot. When he's done placing all the dots, he has made 5 near-perfect letters in Latin. So this is not a random pattern, but a signal. a strong signal, and it basically is saying that not only did the Romans write the New Testament, or in this particular, the book of Luke, but they also signed their name to it. So, that's, it's like Q followers and so on. What are you looking for as far as evidence is concerned? This is beyond a whole lot of 17s. Okay, so back to Luke, chapter 20, verses 19 to 26. In Luke, this is found at 20:19. The chief priests sought to lay hands on him, and they said, "We know you say and teach rightly. Is it lawful for us to give tribute unto Caesar or no?" But he perceived their craftiness and said, "Why do you tempt me? Show me a denarius coin. Whose image and superscription does it have?" They replied, "Caesar's." And he said, "Give to Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and to God the things which are God's." And so they held their peace. And this matches up with Josephus 4:34, which describes that when Josephus was captured, many senior Romans crowded around him, and there was a tumult, and some threatened him, those further away crying out for execution, and those nearer showing concern for him. And the commanders, initially enraged at him, relented on seeing him. Vespasian gave orders to keep him, as if planning to send him to Nero. And Josephus asked Vespasian to keep him, and called him Caesar, and said he should be punished if he rashly affirmed anything of God. Vespasian initially thought it a cunning trick, yet came to believe it, God erecting his expectations, partly as Josephus had spoken the truth, prophesying his own side's downfall to the day. So Josephus was to be given to the Caesar of the time, but instead was given to a future god, Vespasian, who would be deified by the Roman Senate after his reign. Okay, so leaders sought to lay hands on him. But they held their peace. He must teach only the true way of God. They perceived craftiness, and so that's a parallel. Not, I don't think, terribly strong parallel, but when there are 250 of them, you're going to have a mixed bag. Some of them are going to be very strong. Some of them are going to be very weak. So far, I've been absolutely floored by about 5 to 7 of them, and then I thought that another 20 or so were pretty impressive, and then I've probably thought 10 of them are pretty weak. This one is not as weak, but it's not great. Okay, in my opinion. And just like Jesus in Luke, Jewish War details how Josephus's main role in his published story ended in Jerusalem when he was aged 33. Luke 24:51 represents the end of his story. And in War of the Jews, it is at Jewish War 637, the very last mention of Josephus is later. But this mention of him does not involve Josephus doing anything. I don't know about that. So, and just like Jesus in Luke, Jewish War describes how at the age of 33, Josephus was considered dead outside Jerusalem, but afterwards he was found to be alive, and he appeared in front of Simon and showed his wounds, thereby confounding his mother's expectations of him being buried. And that part of the story is linked to Lazarus's resurrection, which is a separate mockery in and of itself. But so Luke 24:3, and then later verses as well, Jesus was thought to be dead, by the Romans outside Jerusalem, but was afterwards alive, and Mary found he was not in his grave. So they returned, saying, "The Lord rose and appeared to Simon." Then Jesus showed his wounds and ate broiled fish and honey. This story is linked to that of Lazarus in John, and since both stories involve Jesus performing a resurrection. And Jewish War 592 and 593. After being hurt, Josephus was thought to be dead outside Jerusalem, but was later found to be alive, which caused his mother to lament that she could not bury him. Then he showed his wounds to his followers, who were watched by Simon. But meanwhile, Syrians decided to rip apart thousands of Jews escaping Jerusalem, believing they had swallowed gold, with the story proceeding in Jewish War 596 to mention Jesus Christ's resurrection of Lazarus. This is linked to Lazarus' resurrection, firstly by how swiftly the story moves to mention Lazarus' resurrection, and secondly by saying Lazarus' son fled to Titus. I don't quite get that, but I'd say it's definitely a parallel. Okay. And, just like Jesus in Luke, Jewish War describes how Josephus was captured by the Romans 33 years after a key point in Jesus' life. In Jesus' case, 33 years since his birth, Luke 23:32, and confirmed by other various details in the Gospels, and in Josephus AD 66, which is 33 years after Jesus' death, and that is from Jewish War 434, which is Book 3, Chapter 8, Paragraph 8. Okay. Time to flip the page, which I think I did successfully. Not sure. Okay, well, I think we're on the same set of parallels here. No, okay, let's see. Things are going crazy here. There's an alarm clock going off. And no, I pulled up the wrong page. Sorry about that. We'll hopefully fix it quickly. Yeah. Okay, and just like Jesus in Luke, Jewish War describes Josephus' story with the names Joseph and Matthias being placed side by side, along with the name Justus, which in turn is linked to insurrection and murder in the city, in which two men were confined together. So this is Luke, I think, 23:18. After Judas died, the apostles sought to find a replacement for him. Acts describes how two candidates were selected, and they were Joseph and Matthias. Although the first one also went by the name Barsabas Justus. Barsabas, which could be taken to mean son of old man, could be a reference to a son of Vespasian, the old man, because he was already 60 by the time he went to the emperor. And the old man Nero, sent to Judea to be the general in this war, is remarkably similar to Barabbas, and the possibility of a connection has not gone unnoticed by some Christians, who the Romans released. And Acts 1:23 adds that he was cast into prison for a certain sedition made in the city and for murder. Here, the two men who were confined together in prison were Jesus and Barabbas. Meanwhile, Josephus' name prior to adopting Flavius was Joseph ben Matthias. So Joseph Matthias in his autobiography indicates that Justus is also a family name of his, since he gave it to his son. Jewish War 432 describes how when Josephus hid in the cavern with the 40 men, he was confined there, and they committed insurrection against him and murder against each other under the city. The two men confined together under the city were Josephus and his unnamed co-survivor, prior to him being released by the Romans. And just like Jesus in Luke, Josephus's name is not only related to the name Jesus Christ, but is also similar to the name of the man who tended Jesus Christ's grave. According to local conventions, Jesus could reasonably be referred to as Jesus of Joseph, which clearly contains Josephus's name. In addition, the Hebrew form of Jesus' name, Yeshua, is pronounced Joshua, which is a variant of Joseph. Likewise, the man responsible for Jesus' burial was Joseph of Arimathea, which is coming from Luke 23:50. Both have similarities to Joseph and Joseph Matthias, who was responsible for his equivalent grave, because there is a place where Josephus also brings down a man from the cross who survived his crucifixion. Okay, so now he pauses briefly to show where these parallels are when plotted on the graph. If anyone were to argue that these were coincidences, this becomes even harder when it is pointed out that they are positioned to form a clearly intentional pattern. So it looks like these new dots are mainly in the V and a little bit in the T. Now, this is on the thumbnail for the video, this graph. The points in blue are Luke parodying Jewish war. And then the points in black are Jewish war parodying Luke. So it goes both ways. There's a mutual parody going on. Note, this is still not the end of the Josephus-Jesus parallels. I will resume describing them shortly. What's different is those already described mainly form the top left of the V, and those that follow are arranged to form the vertical line of the T around paragraph 350 to 360 of Josephus. I will now continue describing how Josephus and Jesus' stories are parallel. Now, let's see. He's got a footnote here. The Gospels were written in Greek, which wasn't the language of Judea in Jesus' time. The Gospels give his name as Jesus or Jesus, which is the Greek version of Yeshua, which, if you say it out loud, is Joshua. From Joshua, we get Joseph, and Joseph, which in Latin is Josephus. It's all variants of the same name, meaning God saves. Now, so that's another point in favor of the Roman hypothesis that these are both Josephus and the Gospels were originally written in Greek, and that was much more of a language of the Romans than it was of the Jews. The only Jews that really spoke Greek were the elite class, and even then, we're talking about speaking it, not necessarily writing it. And so it would be, I think, a fairly odd thing for, boy, I really have my page numbers off here. I think it would be a fairly odd thing for the Gospels to have been written in Greek. Then in addition to that, the Romans had a monopoly on censorship, if Caesar didn't like it, it wasn't getting published. And if the Romans had also a monopoly on publishing, in order to put out, many copies of the New Testament or the Gospels to start with, each one, you're going to need like a lot of slaves who are scribes to write these down over and over and over again. So that was something that the Romans had a monopoly on as well. And the Romans had a monopoly on distribution. They had the only mail system, and so if it was going to be published, it was going to be published and disseminated by the Romans. If they didn't agree with it, it was not going to be disseminated. And so that puts some cold water on the Pauline epistles, where he's speaking to all of these different cities in letters and having them delivered. The only way that Paul is really going to get these things delivered is if he is an agent of the Romans. And so this is another, I think, pretty strong reason why the Roman hypothesis needs to be taken very seriously. To me, it's, the more I dig into it, the more questions it answers, and the more it throws cold water on the normal theory. If you look at Lee Strobel's book, The Case for Christ, the case, he's kind of like, was a legal reporter for a Chicago newspaper, and he gives you the case, like the legal case for Christ, by going and traveling around and interviewing a bunch of biblical scholars all over the place. And really, in really every case, the case for Christ that's made is an even stronger case for Caesar. So the case that they are able to make for the existence of Jesus is usually always eclipsed by the case that exact same evidence makes for the Roman origins, that the Caesars wrote the New Testament. I'll be presenting a video on that in due time. But for today, we're going to stop. And thanks for tuning in. Have a great day. Like, share, subscribe, and comment.